Okay. Yeah, we are live.
Great.
All right. So, hello to everybody who's joining us or will be joining us very soon. I'm very delighted to have with me Brian Reeves, a former friend and conferencier, if I could say. We have met in southern Germany, just to not be too precise. And I believe he has some amazing political acumen and understanding of Morocco and Israeli relations. And I remember that our conversations were pretty amazing back then. And that's why I was delighted to invite him for the fourth episode of Imru Talks. Brian, thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Imru. I enjoyed your conversations and missed them, and I hope that this dialogue is the first of many.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time, I want to say one of few and hopefully one of many in the future of bilateral Moroccan young people and Israeli people. And I have to point out, I'm half Sudanese, half Moroccan, and both my countries now actually normalize relations with Israel. So
Right.
I think I can speak with my full identity in this sense. So perhaps you could give us a brief presentation on what you do, what are you into, and so that the audience kind of gets to know you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Imru. So my name is Brian again. I uh, live in Tel Aviv. This is a fake background behind me, but this is the city. It's Israel's largest city. I work at an organization called Peace Now. It's a civil society organization that promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it monitors settlement activity in the West Bank with the intent of changing Israeli minds and presenting accurate information to the world. I'm not just what you would call just, I guess, purebred Israeli. Half I'm half American. Of course, I lived actually the majority of my childhood in the United States.
Okay.
So in a way, I'm probably not your typical Israeli, but at the same time, many Israelis are in fact immigrants
Yeah.
or the children of immigrants. In fact, except for Moroccan Jews, Russian Jews are I guess Russian Jews are the largest amount or the largest community
Hmm.
uh, in the state of Israel, and many of them actually left right after the Soviet Union was dissolved. So there are quite a lot of immigrants, but in any case, back to Morocco. I'll be speaking about the community and its particular power and presence that all of us Israelis know of.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm that is a very actually fascinating type of work. So I'm just gonna go straight away and ask you a question about this, of course, obvious new normalization of Israeli-Moroccan relations. And just to quick brief, this is Imru Talks, and this is just a live webinar that I do once a while with people that I deem of high interest and high intellectualism about specific topics, so that we kind of just get the conversation going. I like doing it with young people like yourself and myself, and because I believe we should have a much stronger voice in the world. So my question is to you: what is your take on how the Israeli-Moroccan normalization has been received in Israel? And I'm talking both on the conservative side and the liberal side. If you could
Right.
answer to that, yeah.
Oh no, across the board, it's
Across the
received
spectrum,
positive.
yes.
It is received positively across the spectrum.
No, really.
Israelis rejoice at the idea of normalization.
Okay.
Uh, Now, of course, Morocco wasn't the first country when the whole idea of the UAE normalizing with Israel happened. They did a poll of, what do you support? For example, do you support annexation? You might remember in the summer, annexation of the West Bank was a big issue. Do you support annexation or normalization with this small Arab country, the UAE, which has never actually been at war with Israel? And the vast majority of Israelis, including the vast majority of the right and a majority of Netanyahu's Likud party supported normalization to uh, to this annexation in the West Bank. The idea of being accepted in the region, I think, fundamentally goes to the heart of the Israeli
Gesundheit.
fears and aspirations
Okay.
for their being in the Middle East. They are constantly seen as being the usurpers, this colonial fake country, and so to be accepted finally is very important. And by the way, while Israel itself is very new, relatively, it was founded in 1948. And while it sometimes gets seen as this European country, I think your audience should understand, by the way, that a majority of Israelis actually come from the Middle East,
Middle East.
and yeah, in fact, yeah, if you add them and then Israel's Palestinian minority of about 18% of the population, it's by all means the majority. So everybody's happy. There is one difference. Those on the left, including in the camp I would belong to, would say that we want to make sure that this normalization does not get used to completely sideline Palestinians, but is used as a way to actually enhance the idea of resuming peace by inviting Morocco to take an active role
Mm-hmm.
in
Yes, kind of
mediating.
presiding
And I
of the
think
host committee. Yes, right.
right, and I think Morocco has a mutual interest in that. So
Well,
I look forward to
I
that.
kind of want to answer a lead-up question to that, given what you said. Would you say that the succession of normalizations in this context, if we stay in this macro level before we talk about Morocco,
Of course.
does that make, let's say, Israeli kind of this fear of self-defense and all that, and being kind of a survival state, does that kind of go down or gets atoned by kind of having these countries that were arguably Sudan was probably one of the most hawkish against Israel. Would that kind of make it maybe better for the general perception of Israelis?
Absolutely. Well, in fact, Sudan is the only country out of all these normalizing countries that the term isn't normalization, it's actually peace. Sudan
Okay.
was
Okay.
formally at war with Israel, and many Israelis, they don't know much about Sudan. They know one thing. It's the Khartoum resolution of 1967 that said no peace, negotiations, diplomatic ties with Israel. And so
Yeah.
to have that is a major issue. And for Morocco, of course, with so many Israeli Moroccans remembering that past, this is just it's a game changer. But again, it's not just a game changer for Moroccans; it's a game changer for Israelis. The idea that uh,
Hmm.
we are accepted on an official level. Now, people will always say, what's the big deal? 70,000 Israelis go to Morocco every year. There's $68 million in Israeli exports to Morocco in terms of machinery, $5 million in imports in terms of Moroccan apparel, clothing, and accessories. The difference is that now these relations are not seen as illicit or doing something wrong. It's something that we can stand tall and do, and that we can feel that we're not constantly the mistress of all of these countries surrounding us.
Well, the mistress, I wouldn't really go as far as saying that, but I like the
Not talked
terminology.
about.
So, I mean, would you say then, um, I mean, there has been actually overall trade and overall collaboration with some of these countries, and especially Morocco. In Morocco, we kind of tend to see, especially in the media, only about intelligence and things like that.
Yeah,
We don't really kind of see because it's kind of been a, let's just say it's been a de facto relationship, but not a relationship out there in terms of public opinion. So do you see this normalization now, given that it's an open and out there? And of course, we have to point out this is not a full normalization in case of Morocco. It's
yeah.
kind of it's a, I don't know what exact terms they use, but it's kind of it's a diplomatic kind of recognition and speeding up process. So it's we're getting towards normalization, but it's kind of just the first step there. But would you say that now that Morocco and Israel took this step, uh, do you see sort of FDI flowing in from Israel to Morocco and vice versa, or
Mm.
investments or increased pilgrimage of Israeli people to Morocco? So from a religious, business, and kind of just a social economic point of view, do you see increased bilateral relations beyond the obvious?
Yeah, by all means, and beyond military arms and everything. Yes, the pilgrimages. That's a great point. In addition to that, Morocco, its economy, 40% of the economy is agriculture, and
Yeah.
Israel always touts itself as this agro-tech giant coming up with ways to require less water to do more. So the agriculture industry, you're going to see a lot of outflows into Morocco that way. Uh, you're also going to see, yeah, tourism, not just pilgrimages, but tourism
Tourism, yeah.
by
Yeah.
random people, and then gas and solar energy. Uh, Israel also is very, it tries to be a leader in this. It does have natural gas. Morocco is having a larger demand for that, and then the same goes for solar energy.
I was going to
And I
say also desalinization, actually, and water management.
exactly, yeah.
I feel like Israel is a very strong player in that sense, given the so little resources and the scarcity of water. And yeah, I mean, I'm already imagining Moroccan tourism after in a post-COVID world in a way, tailoring to this actually new um, um, this new clientele, right?
Mhm.
But do you see any sort of thing that will happen to bring about Moroccans? Because let's face it, Morocco, the majority view is still not very favorable to Israel at this
Sure,
point, you know,
yeah.
and the Moroccan state kind of put this deal as in if you're against the normalization, you're technically against the Western Sahara. So it was a great, intelligent way to
Hmm.
tame sort of Moroccan public opinion, right?
Right, it's a power.
Uh, but what can Israel do in a way to kind of increase its soft power actually in Morocco?
Well, the obvious answer is Israel can adopt a more pro-peace policy with the Palestinians for sure.
That's
I
for
do,
sure, yes.
yeah.
But how? How technically, how would they do
Well,
that?
one of the things is it's our belief that right now the Netanyahu government, you know, the idea is we Israel we are bringing relationships into the open with the Arab and North African
Hmm.
states, and we don't need the Palestinians anymore. We can sideline that issue. I think that's a I think that will hurt Israel in the end if that's the idea. By all means, this this allows for Israel to have more flexibility in terms of its relationships
Okay.
with countries in the region. But what should happen in the long term is an honest return to the path toward resolving the conflict. What we've seen with, I mean, we have a lot of experience with normalization with Arab countries, with Egypt and Jordan. It's been decades now, and what we saw was at first it was very positive relations, and for years universities would collaborate even during the thick of the second intifada when many relations were put on ice. But in the last decade, those relationships have gone down the drain, and we also see that most Egyptians or Jordanians, they don't visit Israel, uh, and and they are Israelis are received in an icy manner when they are visited there by the general population, maybe not by the people who are getting the money from various tourist activities, but uh, yeah, if we want to take this normalization up a notch, it's in Israel's interest, of course, to adopt a more proactive policy and conciliatory policy towards solving the main issue that has actually kept all of our countries from coming together in the first place.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So how do you, I guess, if we stay regionally, then how would you see the impact of this normalizations now regionally? How does will this play out? I mean, I've seen when I was in Manama Dialogue recently, I saw King His Royal Highness Faisal Saud. He basically mentioned that, he gave a pretty strong, anti-Israel stance, and he also said that his view was not representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I guess perhaps that's sort of a kind of a gives a little temperature check in terms of how maybe there are different views within Saudi Arabia in that sense. But how do you see kind of these ties now affecting the regional dynamics? if we're talking from a geopolitical standpoint.
Right. Well, first of all, yeah, there is in Saudi Arabia, what we're seeing right now is this battle between the princes, where between those who support normalization and those who don't. It should be understood that Mohammed bin Salman is it. He has a hand behind all of these normalization efforts, including Morocco. You can look it up online. There was a hand that Saudi Arabia had in this, and the reason is Iran. The
Okay.
united front against Iran,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
again, has always been under wraps. In Morocco's case, it's Iran's support for the Polisario Front. In Israel's case, it's obvious. Everyone knows that Iran has its firm stance against Israel, even threatening to wipe us off the map. And it's not just Netanyahu, although Netanyahu, this is one of his main subjects he likes to talk about, but Israel in general is very fearful of Iran, considers it one of its major main threats, not just Iran, but its proxies, Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon and Syria at the moment. So, and again, with Sudan, there was a time where Iranian weapons were flowing through Sudan. Now that doesn't happen anymore, and it's one of the reasons why Israel has been pushing these relations.
Davins, yeah, to make it, yeah, kind of like, yeah, having more friendlier states, let's say, around it, right?
Right.
uh Actually, I just got some feedback from some people. They just missed the first, like, I think 5 or 6 minutes of the show. For some reason there was a little technical glitch. But could you please, just to reiterate for the audience, what was the reaction of Israeli-Moroccan normalization in Israel, just briefly, because you can always go back and see it, but I would like people to who are joining us now to kind of get a sense of that.
Yeah, let me know if there's another technical glitch, and I'll repeat myself. Yeah, broad support across the political spectrum for this normalization. People are thrilled. Israelis, one of the main hangups that Israelis have is that they are not accepted in the region, that they're seen as these interlopers from Europe, even though the majority of Israelis are actually from the Middle East and in North Africa and Central Asia. The uh, the idea is now with this normalization that Israelis can feel that they are now being accepted to some degree, and given the fact that Moroccan Israelis are the second largest community, Jewish community in Israel, for many of them it's not just acceptance, it's closing a chapter of having to choose between two worlds. And finally, now that everything's gone, I think you will see some of these pilgrimages back to the.
Yeah, I mean, I really look forward to actually having a lot more, Jewish pilgrimages back to Morocco. I mean, I know a few cities in Morocco, like Dibdou, are very famous for their Jewish community, and arguably we've lost this diaspora. I mean, it's been there
Mhm.
on a political level, whether in the United States, whether in Israel, right? We know how important Moroccan Jews are in Israel, right? And politically and economically. And I kind of just want to see for Morocco through this normalization an increased exchange of education, of investment, like we said earlier, about water issues, about energy and the agriculture. Like you said, you pointed out earlier, 40% of Morocco's GDP is agriculture. So we definitely need that help. But has there been any concrete steps as of now? Do you see any companies running right now, kind of like, let's see how we can do this? Maybe we'll have, once we set up that flight between Tel Aviv and Casablanca or so, I think you'll see businessmen coming to Morocco. Is that right? Is that a fair
Yeah,
assessment?
yeah. I haven't heard anything, but what we've seen with the other Arab countries, the Arab countries that
Yes, yeah,
have
lots of great
normalized.
examples.
Yeah,
Yeah. What
yeah.
happened?
It took a couple weeks, and yeah, and then business started flowing. There started being business representatives going to Manama and in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Yes, so you're going to see that with Morocco. Certainly travel, but then yes, again, high tech, agro tech, uh, yes, arms, but then also any sort of tech really. I could get again, gas and solar energy is another major issue there. So if it's already $68 million in terms of imports, the number it's just going to go up. Really, tourism might even be second nature to all the tech uh, exchanges that we're going to see in
Okay,
Palestine.
well, I guess here we had a brief discussion before this webinar started, and we were looking at. I was wondering actually if I mean now we know that Trump concluded his deal, and arguably this is has been a foreign policy success for him, right, and for Israel in a way, right? If you look at AIPAC's influence in the United States and all that, but do you think the Israelis think that a Biden administration would reverse these sort of normalizations or try to well, I guess I wouldn't say reverse, but I would say kind of just let them dormant and not be, a much more, proactive sense. And why do you think the Trump administration was able to normalize Moroccan relations at this moment, and Bahrain, UAE, Sudan likewise, and other administrations before that were not able
They're
to?
not able to.
Yeah, why?
Yeah, yeah. I'll first take. I'll push back a bit on the idea that the Trump plan, the deal of the century, was successful. The plan was for Israeli-Palestinian peace. Now that has failed miserably. The Palestinians weren't even talking with the Trump administration,
Yeah, yeah,
and that envisioned Israel annexing the West Bank, something that's not good for Palestinians. And as an Israeli, I find if you can't make if the deal is so pro-Israel that it just blows up in our face, it's not pro-Israel in the end. It's just a recipe for instability. And Trump, the idea of annexation actually went by the wayside. It was suspended in order to get this normalization with the UAE. So it was the abandonment of this fakakta Trump plan that has allowed for things to
So
move
you're
on.
saying this was a second wheel option? This was a kind of a, just a secondary plan B? Would you say that?
What it, I wouldn't say it was a plan B. I think it was there were. I think it's very important not to link the two. That
Okay. Okay.
that of course the Trump plan, it was separately pursuing these normalization efforts between Israel
Yes.
and the MENA
Yes.
region, and it just the ability to include the Palestinians on this failed, and sure you can blame all the parties, but at the end of the day the Trump plan was laughed out of the room. It was a recipe for continuing the worst of what's going on now,
Okay.
and it wouldn't be good for our generations. Now, in terms of your question on Biden, right, what's Biden
Yes.
going to do?
Yes.
The Biden administration has already indicated that it will not just not reverse anything, it will continue this. There is bipartisan Democratic and Republican support in general for these normalization efforts, and certainly Biden is going to push that. One of the things Biden might get is the Saudi Arabia normalization with Israel, and
Okay.
it
Really?
sounds like Saudi Arabia is
Why do
waiting
you make that assessment?
because that is what has been reported in the news, that Saudi Arabia is waiting for the Biden administration to discuss this issue. And again,
However, Saudi Arabia has a lot of, internal pressures and ideologically represents, the Haramain, and it
right,
kind of it would
it
be
might not happen in the end. It
I
might
mean,
not
like
happen in the end, but
like I mean, let's say I'm pretty sure Saudi Arabia deals with Israel anyways, but that's not the point. It's
does.
just not going outright publicly saying that's kind of the what Morocco was doing, right? It was dealing with Israel in a very well, not secret, but let's just say discreet manner, right? But they didn't go out and say it out publicly. Now it's kind of a PR move to legitimize another deal, which is the Western Sahara deal. So,
Yeah,
and actually, I would ask the same question to ourselves as well. Like, we don't know actually if the Biden administration would carry on this sovereignty sort of recognition of Morocco over Western Sahara, right?
it might not. To your question, why was it that Trump was able to do this
Yes. Why was it? Yes,
and
I'm
not
really.
other? I think it's because Trump does not care as much about international consensus, and is willing to buck the trend on that. And certainly with the case of Western Sahara, the the day like the policy of the U.S. and Europe has always been wait for the UN to go about doing this. And Trump in this case took that the plunge, took
Unilateral
the
kind
extra
of,
step.
yeah. Yeah.
So you're actually finding in the US, you're probably following this more than me, is that there's pushback from Democrats and Republicans, by the way, but it's not to not have normalization between Israel and Morocco. It's just to say, no, maybe we should go back to the UN issue. But of course, as you know very well, the UN stance would have a referendum that would include independence, which is something that Morocco couldn't accept. So in this case, Trump is doing something that maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, Trump is doing something that he's taking a unilateral action that other presidents probably wouldn't have done. And when it comes to these other Arab countries who are normalizing with Israel, they involved great deals of arms sales. And
Yes.
these were
I mean, as
things
a matter of fact,
that
even the
other
Moroccan
administrations wouldn't have done probably.
As a matter of fact, even the normalization with Morocco actually comes with the asterisk of $10 billion arms sales. So Congress just passed it actually 3 days ago. I saw that, and
Was it 1 billion or 3 billion? And it
I
includes
think I
drones and
read 10
precision
billion. I
missiles.
might be wrong, but let's just say a few billion. All right, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, it's kind of like it's a trilateral deal. At the end of the day, we might not like Trump, but at the end of the day, he did well. If we look at from a purely Israeli and a purely Moroccan perspective, it's a huge
Definitely.
win for both, right?
For
And he's
these
done what
normalization,
no
it's
other
a
U.S.
win-win.
president has been able to do, or not to act because of supposed international law and international consensus, right? I mean, in a way, you could say these are two countries that have been resembled to each other in terms of their tactics regarding self-determination, everything, and
Right.
kind of saying, well, you know what, if you're doing that, I'm doing that as well. So, it's kind of like, well, I don't want to be demeaning to either of our countries, but one can be critical about saying like it's kind of like two thugs saying, "Yeah, you've got this, I got this, we're good." I mean,
That's the criticism. It's not. I want to make just one distinction for your listeners in Morocco.
sure,
Uh, the I think a main difference between the West Bank and Western Sahara issue is the West Bank. Israel is not looking to give uh, citizenship to Palestinians. It's also looking to give autonomy, but not citizenship. And I think
Mhm.
with Morocco, at least there, in your case, it's the reason why there's actually some more support for Morocco's claims is because Morocco is saying we are going to give people equality. It's just we believe this is ours.
Yes,
So yeah.
yes, yeah, that is a fair statement of the argument. So, okay, I want to kind of ask you then, within the scope of this normalizations and these actually good news in a sense for foreign, uh, let's say the foreign relations of Israel, do you see these Abraham Accords and the Moroccan normalization as actually a good thing for Netanyahu's election prospects and or him clinging into power? Or is he actually using this in a way to say, I'm still a good leader, I'm still doing things, and I'm still making Israel prosperous?
Mhm.
Do you see that, at least
Yeah.
within maybe conservative media or right-wing supporters of Netanyahu?
Right. Well, you'd have to be a pretty blind politician not to use this to your advantage.
That's for
And
sure.
I want to give credit where credit's due. I come from a sphere where every day we criticize Netanyahu, and we really think that he is hurting the country's future by not dealing with its existential issue, which is the Palestinians and the fate of our democracy. Uh,
Okay.
but by all means, normalization is a good thing for Israel. It is a great thing for Israel, and yes, he deserves that praise. Now we're getting this normalization again by doing away with decades of Israeli military doctrine of making sure our other Arab countries do not get large amounts of arms. And that is now going by the wayside. But it does seem like in the new Middle East or the MENA region, that's not as much of an issue. So maybe it's not good for human rights in the Gulf, but from an Israeli perspective, yes, it's a good thing, and Netanyahu is using this to his advantage, and he's actually keeping out other politicians from other parties from being part of this, so that he can say it's just me. And
So you
I think
take full credit. Okay.
that's petty and manipulative. Um, And I wish he wouldn't do that because it's not for the good of the country. But yes, again, at the end of the day, this is a coup for him, and he needs it because he's failed abysmally in terms of shepherding Israel's economy in a way that is that is stable. Right now, Israel is on the verge of going to elections. In this case, it's because Netanyahu doesn't want to pass a stable 2-year budget. You need to pass a long-term budget in a small country like Israel so that your country is seen as stable, so that you know where the money flows are going. And instead, he's resorted to small dealings, petty politics, keeping these larger deals from happening, and also he actually agreed with his coalition partner to leave power in 18 months. And those 18 months are almost up. They'll be up in the summer. Everyone knows that he's not going to leave power. And so he's using whatever excuse possible to push for elections. And now even the opposition is saying, okay, we know that he's going to try to go to elections, so we might as well go to elections as well. It's a mess. And if it wasn't Netanyahu in power, I don't think Israel would have had 4 elections. If we have another elections, it'll be 4 elections in the past 2 years. We wouldn't have had it without Netanyahu being in power.
Yeah, and how did he, kind of just zoning in here a little bit on Israeli domestic policy, how did he use COVID to his advantage? Because we all know everybody used COVID to some sort of advantage, whether it's securitization, whether it's kind of ramping up the pressures on free media. I'm just wondering if anything sort of like that happened in
Oh,
Israel.
it's a great story. Yeah, no, it's a great story of if anyone loved House of Cards or Game of Thrones.
Okay.
I mean, this is Israeli politics. You hate the guy, but you gotta love the game.
I think you need to democratize it. I would love to. I mean, I don't read Hebrew, but like we don't get the whole story, outside of Israel, actually.
Right. So Netanyahu is facing multiple corruption charges, as you may have heard.
Yes.
He's used COVID to push back those court hearings several
Yes,
times.
that I'm aware of. Yes.
He's used it to so-called shrink the democratic space by making it harder and harder for people to gather for protests,
Okay.
even though protests have been scientifically found not to have contributed to the spread of COVID, because we actually wear masks, and we sometimes socially distance, sometimes we don't, but we wear masks and it's outdoors, and yet he has constantly tried to get rid of those. And then the main coup, this is the House of Cards coup, was he finally beat the main opposition party into submission, and the main opposition party went into the government rather than going to a 4th election. And in the past 6 months or 8 months of this, we call it a unity government because it's the 2 largest parties are in the same coalition. This opposition party in its head, Benny Gantz, this sturdy general, has been turned into a laughing stock. It's like his feet were cut out from under him. He has no power to stand up to Netanyahu, and so Netanyahu has managed to decimate this opposition just by sidelining them, while at the same time he's managed to keep some smaller parties in his pocket so that he'll be able to stay on to power. Some of these small parties are they're called Haredi or ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties.
Okay.
That many of them were flaunting COVID regulations and actually leading to
religious reasons.
Not for religious reasons. It was. I don't want to put. I want to be very sensitive here. I think historically these religious communities have had a lot of reason not to put trust in the government, and so when the government says wear masks, socially distance, it took them a while to do so. And what Netanyahu did is he allowed them to get away with large gatherings. Nothing was enforced. He gave tons of these stimulus bailout monies to them or to the general community that was not done in the right way. It was just petty politics at its worst, and it wasn't good for the better of the country itself.
So basically, if what my sense of what you're saying is that Netanyahu is great for foreign policy of Israel and is the worst for its internal policy. Is that a fair assessment?
Great for normalization in the short term. Again, in the long term, if Israel doesn't deal with the Palestinian issue, it's
Of
this
course,
is
I'm not mentioning the Palestinian issue. I'll get to that, but I'm just saying, looking at from his own party's perspective, that what
yeah.
he's done has been great, right? And now, if you want, we can get into actually the Palestinian issue, but we'll look at it from a Moroccan standpoint, right?
Sure.
So, how do we, as Israeli and Moroccan youth, actually help each other think about diplomatically to resolve this issue, right? Like, what are we supposed to do? I mean, Morocco's stance is pretty clear on the Palestinian issue. The Israelis, like yourself, know that there has to be some sort of solution. But as far as I know, my personal opinion is that the two-state solution is just looking less and less feasible at this point. So, what would it take, I guess, for a one-state solution with full equal rights and citizenship, so that it's actual democracy without the ethnic side kind of playing a role, even though Arabs, Jews are there, and like Jewish Arabs are there. I mean, it's not really we can't really talk about ethnicity. It's so mixed up, but yes, they might politicize it that way. So what can we do technically to kind of get this moving forward? Something that's actually acceptable for the region and is in check with realpolitik and the realist kind of approach of what's going on there with the settlements. I remember you sharing with me a map of the settlements, which I probably have and show people to
Great.
yeah, but I don't know. I just don't know. And then I'd always avoided speaking about this issue because it's really emotional for people, especially in Morocco. And of course, there were some rebuttals and some people that came out in Morocco saying we don't want this normalization. This is kind of like a backstabbing the Palestinians and all that, right? I mean, and that's a fair statement. But however, you cannot deny the existence of a country, especially when the governments are actually dealing with each other. And so, yeah, how do you deal with that? And what can we do, like as future researchers, policymakers, decision makers? Do you have any ideas? I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think whatever one's opinion on what a future solution could look like, uh, you can basically do the same thing regardless, and that is to support the norms around how peace is made, and that includes, by all means, now that Morocco is normalizing with Israel, engagement with both parties instead of boycotting, engage. So
Yeah.
so
I mean,
they,
I remember your foreign minister Ashkenazi actually saying that. He said, "Well, we were only 10 kilometers away. If they wanted to discuss or negotiate, we're here to negotiate." I mean, it might seem for some to be a sort of a tentative approach, or more so like a yeah, half-hearted approach. Even though, but yet it's still validly true. I mean, if the Palestinian leadership had a bit more audacity, but I'm not sure. Like,
I'm speaking of Moroccans yeah, with Palestinians, I think Israel also is 10 kilometers away from Ramallah, and it could easily get back to
go to
negotiate.
them as well. That's
Right.
that
There's
is very true. I mean, I wish you were there to actually say that to him.
right. There, let's be honest. At the end of the day, while the Palestinians have a lot of issues themselves in terms of their role in perpetuating the conflict, Israel holds most of the cards, and
Yeah.
therefore it's our responsibility. It's the reason why
I
I
mean, now they have
work.
a lot more leverage, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Brian, but they have a lot more leverage. They're normalizing ties with countries, it's in Morocco,
Sure.
everything. So, which means their leverage is even higher. So, what do you do actually now, as Moroccans? How do we negotiate? You
I
know,
think Morocco is in a great position because as a North African country in the Arab League, uh, there's a mediating role. It doesn't mean that Morocco needs to be the sole mediator. It means it can work with other Arab states and the EU and the US and Russia and the UN um, to to stop conflict. If there's an escalation in Gaza, to work to stop that. If there's an opportunity to get both sides together because of some breakthrough, there's that's where we need mediation. And then in terms of youth, in terms of civil society, what can you do? Not on the state level.
okay.
it's, again, when I mean engagement, I mean the idea of saying both countries have a right to exist. Now, the goal is to push for human rights. And human rights means to make sure that both sides have the security they need. But when it comes to the Palestinians, because I do think that normalization, look, I'm not going to be coy, normalization does hurt the Palestinians.
Palestinian cause.
It,
Yeah.
it does. So the way to make up for it in a way that is constructive for everyone
Hmm.
is to make sure that things like you can oppose settlements, but be all for trade with Israel. If you just boycott Israel, then we Israelis, we understand, okay, so you just don't like us and everything we do and anything we have to do with us. But if you boycott the settlements, or at least acknowledge that goods made in settlements are not made in Israel, then you're saying we support Israel, we just don't support your policies over the green line. And it's
Okay.
that differentiation that is crucial. That's what Europe is doing. It's what Trump has tried to get rid of, and that Biden he'll reverse all of Trump's policies on those issues. And I definitely think more dialogue is appropriate. The more Israelis see that Moroccans are interested, the more Israelis themselves were going to look at ourselves and realize that there's somebody else watching, and that we can't just make a bunch of anti-Arab rhetoric, because we're actually saying, we're speaking hatred against people that our friends, whether it's, Arabs, Maghrebis, people that we've considered to be enemies. Now we have to contend with this idea that no, actually, we actually have a lot of friends in the region, and we shouldn't act in ways that are harmful to that.
That is a very acute, astute answer. Actually, I like that. So any policy beyond the line is just something we shouldn't accept, and I can take that. I can stand with that. And but I'm not sure how much it would do to actually pressure Israel to kind of give rights due. Right? I don't know. Maybe if it becomes an international boycotting campaign, then yeah, for sure. I mean, and there are ways to circumvent it. I would guess. Uh,
I'll give you an example. I wouldn't say boycott would work well. I'm just saying, don't make sure that your government isn't treating settlement goods like they're made in Israel and working with settlers. And the reason why I say this is because the UAE is now working with settlers, and so it's great you're
oh
working with
wow.
Israel,
Okay.
but don't work with the people who are literally fueling the conflict on our side. It's like if Morocco started working with Hamas, like we in Israel would say, work with Palestinians, support the economy, but just don't support the people who are hardline committing terrorism against us. A great example is Jordan. When annexation was on the table here, there was no boycott of Israel. There was nothing like that. It was simply Jordan saying, "Look, this is going to affect our relationship. Our people in the streets are getting mad at us because you're talking about annexing the West Bank without giving people equal rights, and it's affecting our ability to lead, and we're financially strained. Jordan has its own financial issues, and there were a lot of low-key diplomatic talks between Jordan and Israel, Egypt and Israel, that probably ultimately convinced Netanyahu that he needed a way out, and that UAE normalization was his way out.
Okay. I mean, the one thing that you're saying kind of makes me think about Morocco's kind of position, because there was a phone call from Morocco to Moroccan monarch to the Palestinian leadership to say, hey, listen, we're still with you in the cause. It's not because we normalize relations with Israel that we've completely forgotten about your cause or that we're giving up on. I'm just afraid that the Moroccan position per se right now has less credibility. Perhaps it has more credibility from the Israeli side, but perhaps it's lost some of its credence or credibility in the Palestinian side. So are we still, in your opinion, actually a good negotiating partner?
Yeah, the Palestinian side will criticize this. They already have, but you might remember that what happened when Israel made peace with Egypt. Egypt was Egypt, the main, the center of the Arab
Yes.
League,
Yeah.
was kicked out. It was suspended. So, and now that's all history. So certainly, I think, I mean, if I was
You're
a,
saying give time its time course, right?
or instead of giving times course, you can come out and, civil society or anyone who actually has an ear to government, this is Morocco's time to say, not just to say words, okay, we support the Palestinian cause, this doesn't affect it, but to say, we want to be constructive mediators here. We want to, when there's the more business that is done between our two countries, the more leverage you have. And again, that's engagement policy. So if Jordan did not have peace with Israel, Jordan would not have the leverage it had to prevent annexation. And Morocco, again, with its historical ties to the Jewish community here, with Morocco actually being a strong economy, and in fact being one of the countries I think Israelis would visit. I think Morocco is a much more interesting country to visit. I'm sorry to the UAE and Bahrain, but Morocco is just, it's a different ballgame. I think
Yeah, that's
it,
fair enough. Well,
it
thank you. I think the audience will be happy about that comment. Um, okay, so I guess could you, because you did bring it up earlier, maybe tell me about the Moroccan Jewish community and how they're perceived, what's their standing, how do you see it kind of taking this forward actually from now on?
Right. This is a very interesting issue because, so first of all, there are about 700,000 Moroccans or people of Moroccan descent are in Israel.
Mm,
It's the second largest Jewish community in Israel, and it's the largest Mizrahi community. Mizrahim are Jews, are basically the Jews who aren't white European Jews, and
okay.
they've always been sort of the people, the downtrodden, the Ashkenazi elite, kept them out of power for long. Moroccans, they came from actually positions of privilege in Morocco, and this isn't
Yeah.
just Moroccans, it's all over the Middle East and North Africa, and they
Yeah.
came to Israel and they were put in these very decrepit housing projects, and again, they were sidelined, and to this day,
Yeah.
Mizrahim are, I mean, it's a broad generalization, but yeah, there's an idea of discrimination, and so Moroccans actually were the community itself was uh, one of the reasons why the Likud came to power. The Likud being Netanyahu's party, being that it was a right-wing party, but it was the first time that the Labor Party, this Ashkenazi Labor Party in Israel, which governed the country for its first 30 years, was kicked out of office. It was because the Likud party actually listened to the problems of the Mizrahi community. And to this day, there is this connection between Mizrahim, especially Moroccans, and to the Likud party, despite the fact that it's been many years now, and
Would you
the left
compare
has
them to
tried to re-engage.
evangelicals and the Republican Party? Is that a kind of a similar comparison in a way?
Um, the that's an interesting comparison. Although again, the evangelicals, they have a lot of money and a lot of power in that sense.
I mean, that's
Whereas,
how I perceive Moroccan Jews, actually, as a matter of fact, now.
right, but when they moved to Israel, they were marginalized and
Mm,
economically, socially, and the
okay.
problem still exists today. And so you find actually in the left, the Labor Party, which is actually going to be no longer, but in recent years, the last two heads of the Labor Party were Moroccan, and that's not a coincidence.
I see.
It's identity politics to try to
Yeah.
bring people on board. Ari, I'll give you an example of just one very prominent Moroccan descendant, is Ari Deri. He's the head of a party here that typically it's a religious party that tends to align with the right, but historically hasn't always. His family left Morocco, and he was discriminated throughout his life. And he created this party that brought voice, even though many Mizrahim voted for Likud, the Likud party itself was still dominated by Ashkenazi men, and and so that voice wasn't there, and he created his own party. And even though this party was a small party, it's called Shas, uh, it was known as the kingmaker. So if the Labor Party wanted to form a government, they needed to make a deal with Shas. If the Likud Party wanted to form a government, it needed to make that deal with Shas. And so it transformed how Israeli politics works. And in fact, the person who is actually considered, who may even unseat Netanyahu, I really don't have many hopes.
Okay.
Actually, another, you might have read about in Israel, there's all these generals trying to unseat Netanyahu.
Yeah.
There's this new general who supposedly might form a party or be the number 2 on the list of a party, is Gadi Ashkenazi. Gadi Ashkenazi, sorry, Eisenkot.
Okay. Yeah. It's
Gadi
not
Ashkenazi is
yeah.
another general. Sorry. So Gadi Eisenkot was Israel's most recent head of the army, and he was a very good general. He comes from Moroccan descent, and so he has that.
Yeah. I don't think many people know that back home, actually.
He
Yeah.
does, and so if we might see, if Israel goes to elections, his name might become a household name for those who read and the news here. And so certainly it's Moroccans today by no means vote in blocks anymore. I mean, that's gone by the wayside. But certainly the trend is to vote right wing, and if the left cares about coming back to power, they need to do a better job about correcting historical wrongs
Very
and
interesting to me.
more.
Why do Moroccan Jewish vote right wing in Israel? In your
I
assessment?
think it's the history. I think first of all they tend to be more socially conservative, which tends to go for right
Okay.
wing parties.
You're
But
saying they're a bit more religious in a way, or no?
yes, but then the other very important thing to remember is this is the Israeli context. So in Israel, again, Moroccans were sidelined, and so
Yes. Okay.
sidelined by the people who are considered the left today, by their historical parties.
I
And
see.
so, yeah, the left will always say, come on, get over these historical, let bygones be bygones. But then at the same time, like in any country, you see that, in fact, the same prejudices still persist
Mhm.
among the white population, and it will take time and more engagement for that to happen, because at the end of the day, I truly believe that the left in Israel has a better economic vision for the
Okay.
country that would help people in more disadvantaged communities. But again, we all know economics isn't enough. You have to give people respect, and to acknowledge certain past wrongs, and to try to fix those, not just economically, but on a symbolic level, on a cultural level, and on a level of recognition.
Yeah, which actually kind of joins in one of the ideas I had while you were making your point, was that I guess one of the ways I see our future collaboration, first of all, something like this is already a start in a way. Like we're already talking publicly, something that's been kind of seen as taboo in many ways, right? Second of all, I would see like kind of a mid-level type of diplomacy. We should stop doing diplomacy at only the high levels. Actually, as a matter of fact, I would love to receive a group of Palestinians and Israelis in Morocco and actually invite them over at Tajin, and we'll discuss policy talk. I don't see why that would be an issue, and probably they'll trust me as because I have no pure interest in the conflict, right? It's not like I feel any stronger with the Israelis than I do with the Palestinians, and as long as they make that sense and they see that, so I think we have a role to play in an entrepreneurial sense. I feel like we really need to kind of get down the table, but do this kind of long haul, changing the minds type of diplomacy at a much lower level than at the state level. We can take up our ideas, write about it, make policy suggestions, but I think we have a role to play through our organizations such as yours, through other like maybe smaller think tanks, and civil society in that sense. So it's just a matter of actually finding funding or such thing for that. And it could even happen informally, as long as we have as stupid as it may sound, but a WhatsApp group with maybe 10 Palestinian leaders and 10 Israeli leaders, or young leaders, right? We can already start a dialogue for a future. If they have, in my opinion, is when you have um, positive memories or positive experiences with people from any part of the world, it does not matter. You will always find ways to resolve it. I mean, it takes personal kind of knowing somebody to actually resolve it. So it's beyond this diplomatic talk. And I always say this: um, we're not going to resolve Moroccan issues, especially with our neighbors and everything, if we don't do it on a lower bilateral horizontal sense. It's not going to happen if Algeria doesn't want to open its borders. Then I can just talk to my fellow Algerian friends and ask them to open the borders. And because maybe they'll get to decision making, maybe they'll influence some decision maker, and we'll get to a solution. So I think it's overrated that we talk about big policy making and big decision maker kind of giving them all the powers, and because they're the ones that take the decision actually, but we're the one that influence the thoughts. So as a matter of fact, I feel like we're more powerful in that sense. Kudos to us, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree entirely. I think civil society, or the grassroots, isn't just important. When it comes to, if you want change on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, civil society is key. The top, at the top level, nothing is
I
going
mean,
to
that's what
change.
happened in East Timor. If arguably East Timor kind of it's
Mhm.
actually a lot.
There are some
People
similarities. Yeah.
people say there's some similarity, whether it's a Palestinian issue or the Western Sahara issue. People say that East Timor, it was kind of actually civil society that really pushed the thing, and then kind of got Indonesia to back off and all that stuff. So in that sense, yeah, it's true. It's just a concerted effort. It's just that we're in the middle of COVID. So what do you do? How do Palestinian cause fit in all of this, right?
Yeah, you have webinars, and I think we will be out of COVID soon. And I want to bring up a good point. It's kind of funny whenever we Israeli civil society and Palestinian civil society, whenever we meet, where do we go?
Where do you go?
We go to Cyprus. We go to
Okay.
like
Okay. Like a
Washington.
neutral area.
Right. We go to Europe, and it's just disconnected. But in a way, we want to be connected. You are right that you can present yourself as a neutral party, but you're more than that. You're a party that is engaged and that has some more of a stake here than just an outside
I
European or
mean, the way
American.
I feel about the Palestinian issue, even though I have no direct link to, let's say, the Jewish diaspora, but as a Moroccan, I would say it's kind of like I'm a binational to begin with. But I would say my in some way my father is Israeli, but my mother is Palestinian. So I cannot like give up on one without the other, because for me it makes complete sense to be close and collaborate with the Israelis, but also at the same time the Palestinians should have their state, they should have their rights, they should have their dignity, and they should have kind of their international stance in many ways. So for me, I cannot give up on one for the other. It's not a, zero sum game.
Exactly.
It's not a zero sum game. Yeah. So is there anything you would like to add as we're hitting the hour mark? I'll actually check for any questions. I don't. I mean, I feel like people. So I know some people are watching, but I don't feel like they were courageous enough, perhaps, to ask you questions at this point. But I'll give them a minute. But if you want to add something, please do. You said you wanted to talk about your actual work, and I'm probably interested in how you actually do things on a daily basis and working towards this issue. So if you could give us a little snap of that, would be great.
Oh, sure. Well, I think we covered it, at least what's relevant. Again, so I'm part of a civil society organization that does meet with Palestinians, and we have a, a talk about, is dialogue effective? Is it just is it actually making the problem worse because nothing's changing? And what we've come up with is dialogue is fine as long as it's purpose driven, as long as it's action oriented. And I
Okay.
think by all means, there are many opportunities, and I say this because I know this is going to happen, not just because I hope this will happen. There will be more opportunities where Israelis and Palestinians will meet in Morocco. Israelis already go to Morocco to learn about uh, the essentially their neighbors, and it is a sort of a natural place where people feel safe. Jews, not just Israelis, but American Jews,
As
including
well.
religious Jews. I mean, many of my friends in college, when I was in college in the United States, uh, every year there was a religious Jew who went to Morocco to study abroad. And so there's a feeling of safety and understanding, and also, yeah, that mutual camaraderie of a past era.
That is great to hear,
And at
actually.
the same time,
Yeah.
there is the Arab MENA connection there. So
Actually, I do have a question from Simon Isawi. So, and this is kind of outright, but he says, "Do you think Israel will have a prime minister of Moroccan descent in the next few years?"
yeah, there you go. Um, so if it's not if Eisenkot wins, fine. If he doesn't, we could continue with Netanyahu, I think, for a few more years. So probably not a few more years, but there's a lot of top politicians uh, in multiple parties. Certainly within the next 20 years, you could see a prime minister. But even if it's not a prime minister, the glass ceiling has already been shattered when it
Shattered,
comes to
yeah.
the head of the army several times. The current transportation minister is of Moroccan descent and really pushes for more inclusion of promoting culture that isn't just Ashkenazi culture. I hate her politics. I think she's rabidly anti-Arab.
Who are you referring to exactly?
Miri Regev, but
Okay, let me
but
write that down.
oh, there's a few others, yeah, and there. But at the end of the day, there are very promising politicians, regardless of politics, that are young, but are members of Knesset and will be in the Knesset for a long time, and that are some of them have made their own parties, others have hit records as being some of the youngest people in the Knesset, and yeah, there's at least, I'm trying to think. I should have looked this up beforehand. There's at least 4 or 5 ministers of Moroccan descent in the government right now, and that's just, I think, pure Moroccan descent. I'm sure there are other people who have some relative.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So actually, so my last question would be actually to you personally. Do you see yourself in kind of the political arena, and could I possibly lobby on behalf of this Moroccan-Israeli dialogue once you are a policymaker in that sense?
Once I'm a boss. Not gonna happen, but I would be happy to help any connections on the policy level, not just the civil society level, but in terms of think tanks that are interested, in terms of smaller businesses that are interested. But yes, certainly
Yeah,
if
so
we're
people watching, make sure you if you want this contact, just look him up, Brian Reeves. He'll help you out, that's for sure. I mean, we need to get this kind of bridge going, and perhaps this webinar, as small as it is, will serve that purpose, at least in a small way. So unless you would like to add anything, I would kind of maybe take a question or two, unless everybody's okay with it. Yeah. So for me, I would first of all say thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, I really learned a lot actually listening to what you said, your analysis. I feel like I have yet to learn a lot more. And you know what? And we didn't mention this, but there is talk about Israeli education in our curriculums, and or Moroccan Jewish education, which is huge.
there,
So I would like to see something similar about Moroccan education, history, all that within Israeli curriculums as well, given the importance of this community there. So for me, education is definitely the first thing and the most important, vital thing to begin with, if we're going to talk about issues of peace and dialogue. So again, I will remain on that educational note and say thank you again. This is really insightful. I really appreciate it. And perhaps on both our ends, we can kind of connect whomever wants to connect. And maybe I'll take a flight to Tel Aviv and try to convince the Israelis at some point to find
anytime.
a peaceful solution to all of this, right? So yeah, thank you so much.
Anytime, come over. COVID,
Yeah,
after
I
COVID.
invite you back as well to Morocco, along with all of your friends and colleagues. So yeah, we look forward to a brighter, more peaceful future, to be just on a positive kind of note between the two countries, and hopefully for our brothers Palestinians. Thank you again, Brian. This is really
Thank you.
nice.
thank you for giving me this opportunity, and yalla, next year in Rabat.
Yeah,
I
inshallah, in
look
Rabat,
forward.
we'll have a reunion. Thank you. I'd say take care of yourself and have a great evening.
You
Thanks
too.
everybody for watching.
Saida.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.